Hey, we are live. Welcome. My name is Dave. I will be your host for tonight's event. Here from the camera store, we have a very special guest here tonight. Looking forward to it. Paul Zizka is joining us. We'll talk about him in a minute here, but we're going to be talking about Glacial Pursuit, Chasing the Magic of Winter in the Canadian Rockies by Paul Zizka, sponsored by Canon Canada. We're happy to have them on board. Now, this is a very special TCS TV Live as we are about to kick off the biggest sale of the year. As most people know, Black Friday is tomorrow. And it's retail chaos, but we have a ton of promos going on in store. We're going to have a lineup of people with vouchers for waiting in line, all kinds of stuff. But this is also Canon's 50th anniversary year, and there are some very aggressive sales. I have to read these because I can't believe them. So the very good Canon R5, there's an $800 savings plus an extra $300 cash back. If that's not good enough, we're throwing in a battery charging kit and a 64 gigabyte Delkin card. So this is great. This is kind of everything you need to kind of get going. So those deals are on now. You can shop at thecamerastore.com or pop into the store. Check out all of our details in person. You are going to like this. Plus, on top of that, if you register for this event, you're going to be receiving an email from Evelyn with the further promotion from Canon. If you're buying a Canon camera or lens, if you didn't register for this event, don't fret, don't worry. You can still take advantage of it. Just email Evelyn. It's EVELYN at thecamerastore.com, and she will forward you those promos there. Now, some of the dirty work here. Behind the scenes here, we do have a bunch of stuff going on, and we have two technicians here. We do have Drew and Gary who are looking out behind us here, making sure everything goes off without a hitch. There is a lot going on here, so that's going to go well. Nothing problem with that. Now, for me, what I love about doing live streams is I get to interact with everybody. So I will be in the chat, and I'll be monitoring, looking for questions and comments. We also have Russ from Canon Canada joining us in the chat as well. He's going to be there to ask your questions or answer your questions as well and address them, but we'll both be there. I'll be compiling some questions to ask Paul at the end of the seminar here or the end of the show here. So if you don't want to join the chat and you still want to send a question, just simply email it to me, Dave at thecamerastore.com. Now, I'm going to introduce our guest here right away. Before we do, though, I want to thank Canon Canada for sponsoring this event and putting the special offers together. We're looking forward to this. So, on to the good stuff now. If you're not already familiar with our guest tonight, Paul Zizka is an award-winning mountain landscape and adventure photographer based in Banff, Canada. He's frequently published in some of North America's top magazines, including National Geographic, Maclean's, Canadian Geographic, Outdoor Photographer, and has 4 coffee table books already, one of which won the very prestigious 2019 Banff Mountain Book Competition in the Mountain Image category. Paul, thanks so much for joining us tonight. So happy to have you here.
Thank you so much for the intro, Dave. I really appreciate it. It's truly a pleasure to be here this evening. Let me just share my screen with you all. We're going to kick this off, and we're going to talk about the magic of winter in the Canadian Rockies. So thanks, first of all, to all of you for choosing to spend your evening with me. A friend told me there's no NHL games tonight, so that was one less thing to compete with. Actually, that was unbeknownst to me, so that's just the luck of the draw. I'm delighted to be here. I'm thankful always to have the opportunity to be able to share my passion and my home actually tonight, because tonight's all about the Canadian Rockies. So excited to share my home with you all, and I'm excited to always be able to meet with like-minded people and people who have common interests for nature, for photography. I find that increasingly the way that we consume photography is, I think for most of us, is through social media, right? At a very rapid pace with a lot of fast scrolling. And I find that there's rarely time to go beyond the pixels nowadays and talk about the experiences and the process and the moments that go along with the photos. So I'm super thankful for the camera store to give me the opportunity tonight to, share a little bit more about what went into some of those photos that you may have seen maybe on the website or on social media. Thanks also to Canon Canada for putting this together. I'm excited to just celebrate the magic of winter in the Rockies with you all over the next 90 minutes or so. So let's go beyond the fast-paced scrolling, and let's get into the stories a little bit more tonight.
Sounds good.
All right. So let me just share with you a little bit about myself before I go any further here. I'm basically, I'm not from here. This was not my home originally. The mountains were not my home. I was born and raised in Quebec City, and I moved to the mountains. I came to check out the mountains a little while back, like many Easterners, and typical story. I fell in love with the place and decided to make the mountains my home. And I've been living in Alberta for, gosh, close to 15 years now. And I live here with my wife, Megan, and we have two little girls. They're aged 5 and 10. And I've been doing photography full time now for about that same amount of time. So about 15 years, which is kind of surreal to think about. I feel like I just started yesterday, and I think I still feel, I still experience that sort of imposter syndrome where it's just crazy to me that I've been sort of a fully employed, self-employed artist for this long. So I'm pinching myself at times. I'll share some of the results of those 15 years tonight with you all, of course. On any given year, a lot of my adventure photography and my landscape photography and a lot of the teaching that I do as a photographer takes me abroad. And so I'm very thankful that as much as I love my country, I do get to spend a good portion of every year documenting and teaching in remote, wild parts of our beautiful planet. This is a self-portrait taken on a Greenland ice sheet a few years ago. Absolutely beautiful night up north. But tonight, this is what we're going to talk about. When I'm in Canada, this is my home. You'll recognize Mount Rundle on a beautiful moonlit night in the mountains. Actually, kind of looks like that tonight after the fresh snowfall that we got overnight last night. And in the moonlight out there, I was just having a look before the talk, and it's absolutely amazing for photos out there at the moment. So this is my home, Banff National Park in the heart of the Canadian Rockies. I'm really, really thankful to be able to live in what I consider to be one of the most inspiring, exhilarating playgrounds in the world for photography. And we're going to showcase that tonight. Beautiful Mount Rundle. And what I should say, though, about this place, about this incredible backyard, as spectacular as the backyard is, it comes with a significant caveat. The Rockies are also home to what I would argue are some of the longest winters anywhere in Canada, outside perhaps places like Nunavut and the Northwest Territories. I've skated on lakes here in the Rockies probably as early October, beginning of October. And sometimes some of those same lakes won't shed their ice until June or sometimes July. So you kind of have to forget about the standard definition of winter here in the Rockies. Winter really rules these mountains for a good portion of the year. Given that, if you're going to live in the Rockies, you really don't have a choice. You either have to be a winter enthusiast or you have to be willing to try becoming one. But thankfully, I truly believe that if you're willing to put up with a little bit of discomfort, granted, it's not as comfortable shooting in the winter than it is in the summer, although it's a lot easier because of how good the gear has become over the years. I think if you're willing to put up with a little bit of discomfort, you'll find that magic is absolutely everywhere. There's incredible photos to create and incredible memories as well. So tonight we're going to celebrate the joys and the gems of wintertime in the mountains. I hope you enjoy the photographs that I'm going to present. I hope they inspire you in some way to get out and explore and embrace the magic of the snowy season, especially if you're the kind of photographer who's right about now is starting to have their mind wander back towards summer and you kind of want to skip winter altogether. Well, hopefully this presentation will help you become more enthusiastic about the upcoming months. So first of all, what we're going to do is we're going to watch a little video that I think exemplifies the rewards of getting out there in the cold. So if you can, Drew, if you can just play that first video. Mission Space Cowboy, the weather is favorable today for a liftoff. We've got Air Warren Sharp here.
Lock your boosters in, sir. Locked in.
All right.
You gotta give me a push, we're stuck.
And okay? This could go either way. Reminds me of the lunar landing.
It's stuck.
You have to overcome the friction coefficient, Warren.
Oh, we gotta feel
and we're off.
We have liftoff.
We're off. Godspeed, Sam. All right, so there you go. This is, for me, this is the joy of winter. You have four grown men having the best of times with a big block of ice and an astronaut suit and basically becoming a bunch of toddlers for a few hours on a Monday afternoon. Which those are the moments that some bonding moments where you just allow yourself to just forget about the troubles of daily life, and you just let Mother Nature take over and just let yourself be a 5-year-old again. I think that's one of the joys of going out there with friends. So that's what tonight is all about. The program tonight, as you can imagine, after 15 years or so of shooting the Rockies in the winter, I've ended up with a fairly large collection of images. What I've done tonight is I've gathered 50 or so of my favorite images, and I've collected those images, and I'm going to present them to you according to 4 of my favorite topics to shoot in the winter, 4 of my favorite subjects to shoot in the winter season. So first of all, we're going to talk about ice caves. Everybody loves ice caves. They're out there right now, and there's some incredible photography that can be accomplished in those magical places. We're going to talk about ice caves. Then we're going to talk about wild ice. So we're going to talk about basically the frozen lakes in the Rockies, and we're on the cusp of that happening all over the mountains now. So exciting time of year for wild ice. Then we're going to talk about methane bubbles, which is another just really, really cool phenomenon that gets photographers pretty fired up. There's not a lot of phenomena that gets photographers more excited than methane bubbles. People come from all over the world to shoot them. The locals are nuts for them. So that'll be our third topic for tonight. And then we're going to talk about nighttime photography. Finally, there's going to be time for a little slideshow at the end, as well as a question period. So save your questions for the end, pop them in the chat. I'll be happy to answer as many as I can. All right, so let's kick it off with some ice cave talk. I find glaciers are such fascinating, just fantastic subjects for photography, and for many reasons. First and foremost, of course, the aesthetics, right? Glaciers are just plain beautiful. The geometry, the endless shades of blue, the fascinating interplay of ice and light. There's so much beauty to photograph in and around glaciers. This is a Saskatchewan glacier in Banff National Park. Also find that glaciers are really mysterious places and really sort of misunderstood and a little bit eerie as well. And they're really gateways to a world that is completely foreign to the vast majority of people. And I find it really, really rewarding, not only to explore that world, but to be able to bring it to people who are not familiar with it through the power of photography. That really, really excites me. One of the greatest joys of photography is being able to just stir up emotion in people, make them feel in some small way like they are standing in an ice cave. And I love taking on that challenge as a photographer. This image I shot inside the Stutfield Glacier that's next door in Jasper National Park. And of course, the vast majority of visitors, this is sort of the view that they'll get of the glaciers, right? They will witness the surface of those big rivers of ice, big cascades of ice, which are fascinating in themselves, with their ice falls and seracs and millwells and tumbling crevasses and towering little towers. They're really, really interesting places, whether or not you're into photography. They're really cool places to look at from the road or to just go hike along. But underneath the surface is really a whole different world that largely awaits documenting in my mind. And that world is typically a lot safer to explore in the winter when the glaciers are more stable. And that's why I chose this topic for tonight. I thought it was timely because now we're getting into the season where the glaciers are becoming a little bit less active. There's always safety concerns, of course, and I'll address some of those in a little bit. This is a self-portrait taken at the Opaban Glacier in Yoho National Park. We're just hopping around a national park system here. This is Yoho National Park, just across the border from here. And this is a self-portrait. And there was a second entrance to the ice cave from the side, which explains the lack of tracks there. And so I set up the tripod, proceeded to enter the scene in order to show hopefully a little bit of more of a sense of place, a sense of scale, as well as maybe give the image a little bit of a sense of vulnerability as well. It's an image that makes people sometimes a little bit uneasy, understandably. So let me share a few more photographs of that sort of underworld that I find so fascinating, so captivating. This is an image that was taken, I believe, in the Dome Glacier. And if you look at the size of those ice crystals on the ceiling, if you get the right amount of airflow, the right amount of humidity, you can see some of those crystals grow to just ridiculous size. Of course, this is a little bit exaggerated from through the use of the wide angle lens, but trust me, those crystals were massive. And just anytime you would shift your head left or right a little bit, the light would bounce differently on them. And it was just, it was a little bit psychedelic. It was a really, really cool experience. So how do these ice caves form? Well, the vast majority of them are carved out in the summer by water when subglacial rivers are flowing under the glacier. So all the water, all the surface water that you see if you were to go walk on a glacier, eventually through gravity makes its way to the bottom of the glacier through those mill wells. And then you have those vast networks of streams that flow under the glaciers. And occasionally they'll just meet up into a bigger stream and carve out the ice from underneath and create those really elaborate tunnel systems. And so in the summer, of course, it's hard to get in there, for one, because of the flowing water. And the glacier is a lot more active, so a lot more dangerous. They're a lot more dynamic. In the winter, those river systems, they will freeze, and so you can basically walk on the riverbed and enter those caves a lot more easily. And so when I started showing interest for ice caves and glaciers in general, I came across a small circle of other folks, other photographers who wanted to go out there and explore and were pretty avid ice chasers as well, glacier ice chasers. And so we've made a point over the years to revisit the same glaciers repeatedly, pretty much because they're so dynamic, right? The glacial recession, as sad as it is that we're losing our ice so quickly in the Rockies, well, one upside of that, I suppose, is that the toe of the glacier is typically a very dynamic place. And so as an artist, you can revisit those places year after year after year and be given a fresh canvas to work with every time. And so those make for very creatively inspiring places, very creatively exciting places to visit. So we usually make a point of revisiting a lot of the more accessible glaciers year after year. Some of them are, a few hundred meters from the road. Some of them maybe 10, 15 kilometers from the road. And because they change so much over the summer, you never know what you're going to find in early winter the next year. So it's always exciting to see what's changed. And as I said, it's also kind of sad to just marvel at the amount of ice loss, but at least, those places make for dynamic places for dynamic subjects for photographers as well. You have, for example, glaciers like the Pito in Saskatchewan that I believe have lost, something like 150 meters to 150 to 200 meters of ice, of horizontal ice in one single year recently. So, of course, that means any feature that you might go and document at the toe of those glaciers will be long gone by the time the next year comes around. Basically, where you were shooting the year before, it's not unusual to return to the same spot and not find ice anywhere within 100+ meters of the spot that you were documenting, which is kind of mind-blowing. And so you go back every year and you find that things are just basically unrecognizable. And of course, the dynamic nature of those environments presents some issues in terms of safety as well, right? So it's important to understand that there's always a hazard associated with ice caves. Those things change and they do collapse. They always do. They constantly collapse and shift. And any time spent in an ice cave is a hazard. You know, it's risk that you have to mitigate as best as you can. Everybody assesses the risk differently, and everybody's sort of sphere of accessible risk is different. But safe to say that it's more it makes more sense to explore those places in the winter when they're a lot less active. Now, it's still important to try to, usually what I try to do is try to assess how active a cave might be. And usually that comes from looking at, you know, are there any fresh breaks? Is there debris on the ground, etc.? Or if it's a cave where that I visited a little while back, or that I know a friend visited and sent me some photos, I can just compare and see, you know, is that place kind of static or is it really changing very, very rapidly? And so trying to assess just based on how it looks, always keeping an eye on, you know, being aware outside temperatures, you know, colder days are better, trying to avoid big swings in temperatures as well. And of course, try to minimize your exposure time in the caves. So I'm not talking about camera settings here, talking about how long you spend in there trying to figure out your settings. So being familiar with your gear and being quick at assessing composition so that you can operate quickly, of course, is a big win in terms of safety. Here's another image from an ice cave. This is sort of a sort of split level shot. It reminds me of sort of underwater split level shots. And the idea here was to try to blend the two worlds together, the stars overhead, the stars above the glacier, and the incredible world of blue inside the glacier. And so I set up the tripod on this little mound of snow. This was taken at the Saskatchewan Glacier in Banff National Park. And I asked a friend to help me out with the lighting inside the glacier to reveal the structures and bring out that beautiful blue. And then once that was done, I proceeded to engage the intervalometer, and then I entered the scene so that I could show up in the shot as a silhouette. It was very, very dark on top of the glacier, much darker than under the glacier, of course. And I lucked out with the positioning of the Milky Way, so I ended up being framed in the Milky Way. But I was happy to get an image that sort of matched my initial vision, where I think it blends the two worlds together quite nicely, and it's got that little bit of mind-bending feel to it as well. Here's another shot of the Saskatchewan Glacier. And that kind of how that came to be was that, well, we spend a lot of time at the Saskatchewan Glacier. And then every time that you're on the long walk back home, because it's about 12 kilometers back to the car, your head is just exploding with ideas of how to explore that place again and put a new spin on it. And how do, you know, who can I come back with to just not necessarily get stronger images, but get images that maybe are a little bit different, that excite me creatively. And I'm lucky to just have friends who are very, very talented in the world of skiing, climbing, and beyond. And they're used to going out with me and collaborating, where we try to create images that are a little bit maybe unusual and that blend, you know, that blend people and landscape in a way that's kind of artsy, I suppose. And so one idea that I had walking out of the Saskatchewan Glacier one day was calling up my friend Sasha Galitsky, who's super talented aerialist out of Jasper. And she's got a film coming out soon. You'll want to check it out. And she works with silks. So and she's a climber. She's just super technically skilled and really elegant. And so we decided to make another trip back into the Saskatchewan Glacier, and we rigged up the rope on top of the glacier. I didn't rig it up. I was looking for compositions. I was fortunate to have a couple friends helping with that, rigging up the system. And then our jaws just dropped when we watched Sasha just ascend the silks and just pull all those incredible figures and tricks. And to the naked eye, it was just so cool, so cool to watch. And I watched it almost entirely through the camera, and I ended up shooting so many frames of what was unfolding. But part of me wanted to just set the camera aside and just take it in solely with my eyes. It was pretty special to watch. And thankfully, Other people shot it on video, so I was able to watch the videos afterwards. But this is one of many, many stills we came up with that I really, really like at the Saskatchewan Glacier. Here's another cave. This is the Blue Jeans Cave, we called it. And the reason we called it that, affectionately called it that, was that it was very, very easy access. And I'm sure some of you went in there, some of you remember it. It was at the Athabasca Glacier a few years ago. And the cave was probably, I want to say 15 minutes from the car park. And the reason it was called the Blue Jeans Cave is that due to access, you would find people in there at times with very urban attires, and you stumble upon, the odd person in flip-flops or high heels or blue jeans. And that's how accessible it was. But it was cool to see that world being made more accessible to people who didn't have, backcountry experience or anything like that. And so we went there at night, and the idea was to shoot skiing and snowboarding. But whereas a lot of the night shots that I've presented tonight and that I'm used to creating require models to stay in position for very long, the idea was to actually shoot fast action at night and get the models to actually just do something that's a lot more fast-paced and actually do the activity as opposed to stage it or pose it. And so I went in there, and that was a few years ago now. We went in there with a couple skiers, a couple snowboarders, a flash, and we built that little jump and an up track on the side of the glacier that's just behind the skier there. And that way we had 4 people to work with, because it was pretty hard to get the timing just right with the flash and trying to backlight the skier. You have to imagine, to the naked eye, it was pitch black there. We couldn't see anything from where I was standing. So it didn't look anything like what you see on the photo. And so after many, many attempts and a lot of sweating and a lot of near, just images that were close but not quite, we were able to get this one with the snow trailing off the skier, using the flash position directly behind the skier with a little bit of light spill on the blue ceiling of the ice cave. So the Athabasca Glacier a few years ago. This one was several years in the making. I'd always wanted to shoot ice climbing at an ice cave under the aurora. I don't know if that might have been too much to ask, because it took a few years for it to all come together. I guess maybe I'm a little bit too demanding towards Mother Nature at times, but eventually all those conditions aligned. It was a few years, because I remember a couple of times the roads closed because of avalanche control. A couple of times the climbers were not available, or the aurora data looked great but died down by the time we got on location, or the clouds moved in. There were a lot of misses before this magical night happened. And that night, the aurora just fired on all cylinders. It was absolutely incredible. I remember I had 2 climbers I was shooting. And I remember whenever they would be up on the wall holding still for the long exposure, they would say, we would just marvel at and just the oohs and ahs all the time because of the aurora that was happening overhead. And I remember the climbers saying, I want to look, tell me when I can look. And I'd say, no, not right now. I'm in the middle of an exposure. So they paid the price to get those photos. But that's the nice thing about working with models, is the photos are theirs as much as they're mine, and the collaboration is just so rewarding for everybody else, everybody involved. This was another shot that night. Some of you might have my book, Canadian Rockies Rediscovered. This is the cover, fisheye shot of Mike Stewart with the aurora just going crazy at the Athabasca Glacier in Jasper National Park. All right, so now we're going to talk about a different kind of ice. We're going to talk about lake ice. And this section is all about the wild ice season. It is very, very timely, because it actually began maybe a month ago here in the Rockies, but the best is yet to come. And I'll get back to that in a moment here. So my history with lake ice, to begin with, like many Canadian kids, like many of you, I'm sure, I grew up skating on ponds and lakes back home in Quebec. And so when I moved to Banff, it just made a lot of sense to kind of seek out a similar experience here in the mountains. And I have to say, the skating potential was not immediately obvious upon arriving in the mountains, simply because the activity was overshadowed by way more popular mountain activities like skiing and even ice climbing. When you move to the mountains, that's all you hear about is what are the skiing conditions like. Understandably, the skiing can be amazing around here. But the potential of wild ice was revealed to me after I had to do a little bit of research. I absolutely love the sensation of skating, the sort of sense of freedom that you get when you lace them up and you start to glide across fresh ice and you feel like you're flying and everything feels easy, that almost like levitating. That feeling alone for me is just addictive. But once you add the greens and the blue hues all around you, that famous turquoise of the lakes of the Rockies, once you add some of the most spectacular skylines reflected all around you, I find it really takes the experience up to a whole other level. And it's something that you can't help but want to share with the rest of the world. This was Pito Lake last year. It was a dream of mine to skate on Pito. And I three of us had kept a close eye on conditions for a long time. We looked at the weather, drove up to the platform, looked at things from afar. Thankfully, and some of you who are into skating might not be aware of that, there's amazing satellite tools that we have at our disposal now to try to figure out where the lakes are at without driving all over the place. But anyways, that morning we hit it just right. It was just the second that we got to the lakeshore, we turned into little kids. We started buzzing. We measured the ice. It was thick enough to be safe to skate on. It was just it was see-through. That famous turquoise was all around us. It was a beautiful, beautiful day. And I believe that was early November. So that was early November last year, earlier than right now. We had colder temperatures around this time of year than we did this year. And so the kickoff to the season happened much earlier. So there's my friend Warren just having a blast gliding across Pito Lake last year. And before I show you a few more photographs of wild ice skating, I just want to play a little wild ice video that I think encapsulates the joyful, the contagious nature of the sport. So we'll play that little 1 minute or so video, and then I'll come back to share some more stills with you.
Hey, Bryce.
All right. All right. So it's become, as you would expect, it's become a little bit of an annual exciting tradition to try to clear up the schedule as much as possible, starting right around late October, and try to really pay close attention to the weather forecasts and try to align those perfect early season ice conditions. Just like in photography, the thrill of the chase is an important part of the process for me. I like that you don't win every time and that it's hard to align those perfect conditions. And so, that hunt for wild ice is really, really thrilling part of the whole process for me. And of course, once you're there, once you do find that ice, once you've had some fun skating around, creating images, building images in that kind of environment, is really special as well. This was Spray Lakes last year. This is pretty much as glassy as ice gets. And if you get low, you can typically get the better reflection. So there's a little tip if you want to shoot wild ice. And I I shot this one low because I wanted to elevate the skaters above the jagged skylines that we have here, but also shooting low allows me to get that way better reflection. So something to keep in mind if you get out on ice this winter is try to just lie down on the ice and put your camera right against the ice and see what you get. You might be pleasantly surprised at the perspective. And usually what we're looking for in terms of weather is an early season sustained stint of cold nights with as little wind as possible, and of course a lack of precipitation. So remember, if it's a bad year for skiing, if it's a bad stretch for skiing, it might be a really good stretch for ice skating. So it pays off to be interested in all the different activities because you kind of win every time. And I would say prime time is probably coming up this year for wild ice. We started out on a really good note. I went out to Abraham Lake quite a while ago, in Vermilion quite a while ago now, and had incredible ice there. And then we got that sort of warm spell that's basically still happening now, and that's almost hit the reset button. The good news about the warm spell that we've had, and even the snow that we just had last night, is a lot of the lakes have yet to freeze, and so there's still a lot of hope that this year will be a great season. The last few winters have just been phenomenal for wild ice, and that's partly why the sport has grown in popularity so much. So we're a little bit later than usual this year. For example, almost all the lakes from Lake Louise up are still open. Lake Louise is wide open, and Lake Louise was frozen probably 2 weeks ago last year. And so big difference this year, but still a lot of hope. So let's keep an eye on the forecast and just see if we can find some good ice out there. That's my plan for the next little while. This is Lake Louise. Lake Louise is usually done for the season after within a week of freezing, because it gets snow very quickly, being located just east of the divide, as you can imagine. It usually doesn't take very long for Louise to get snow following freeze up. So Lake Louise is still wide open. This image was taken very shortly after freeze up. It was shot from the roof of the Chateau Lake Louise. And I had a couple of friends out on the lake with two lume cubes pointing down towards the bottom of the lake to try to create that halo that you see there. And you can see the detail in the bottom of the lake in a lot of different areas in the photos. And that's just because the ice had recently formed and it was just as translucent as it gets. And so I had the goalie and the hockey player on radio, and I was directing them from the roof of the chateau, and they stuck it out for a long time. It took a while for the clouds to move out of the way so we could get a few stars in the shot, but we got our 10 minutes of glory and we made it count. And special night out on Lake Louise when it turned into one of the world's ultimate ice rinks. So whereas Lake Louise, so the lakes that are located along the divide, once they get snow, they're done for the season just because of where they're located. On the other hand, you have some lakes that can be blown clean several times throughout the winter season because of this incredibly unique phenomenon that we have in the Rockies that's called the Chinook winds. And so a lot of the lakes that are located east of the divide will get effect from the Chinook winds, and will get blown free of snow in a very short time span at times. And Lake Minnewanka, which you see here, is one of them. Same thing with Barrier Lake, Gap Lake, Lac des Arcs, Abraham Lake. All those lakes located closer to the mountain front are exposed to Chinook winds, and they offer hope throughout the entire season. They can go from holding like 10 centimeters of snow to being the most incredible mirrors within hours. And I've seen it happen multiple times over the year. And that was definitely one of those mirror-like effects that night on Lake Minnewanka. This is my friend Lee Nordby, who's a great friend, great photographer. And I asked him to pose for this shot. And the way we got this image was we positioned the flash behind him. You can't quite see it. It's being hidden by his body there. And then shot this image with the flash, asked him to just hold the position. He's leaning on his stick so he can hold the longer exposure pretty well. And I asked him to exhale to get a little extra, to give the photo a little bit of extra. And then I just let the camera run for a whole bunch of 30-second exposures while we went and played hockey on another portion of the lake. Actually could not find my camera that night, which was a little bit embarrassing. The battery died, and so the little red light just which was my go-to to find the camera, was nowhere to be found. So we had to resort to strategically skating, the three of us skating patterns back and forth across the lake, grid style, in order to locate the camera again. And it took us a long time to find it, but I got the image that I envisioned. So all ended well. This is mid to late season ice, again at Lake Minnewanka, another image with use of the flash with the lucky little bounce off the hockey stick of my friend Chris there. A little bit of aurora action along the northern horizon, use the Lume Cube as well as the flash for the lighting. And even when you don't get, and I include this image because even if you don't get that perfect mirrored reflection, this is probably March or April ice, you can still get some really, really cool patterns to work with. And so the ice evolves throughout the season, and it's quite amazing to me how many forms and shapes it can show over the course of a single season. This is an image of my wife. So we have a series, a red dress series that we've been working on for years, when we just go out on, you know, our little adventures around the mountains. And this is a collection that we've been adding to over the years. And this was shot pretty recently. I want to say about a year ago at Spray Lakes. I don't risk my wife's lives to get the photos I envision. So this is a bit of a trick of the wide angle lens. She's actually skating on pretty thick ice. Of course, I have the camera in an underwater housing for this, shooting at 15 millimeters. Sometimes you'll have the edges of the lakes will just remain a little bit more open because of currents, because of shifting ice slabs, because the ice moves back and forth. The same reason that sometimes you'll have big slabs of ice pushed up vertically on the shore. Sometimes they pull apart along the shore and reveal little. This is actually a pretty small open section of water. And so that allowed me to blend sort of the wintry world above and the more summery look of the lake below. So that green blue that you see in the summer in all the lakes of the Rockies remains throughout the season. In the winter is just harder to access, but it's always under our skates. In terms of safety, because I know that'll probably be one of the questions, I think it's very important to, of course, assess the ice, measure the ice. What we usually do is we'll go out there with lots of safety gear like ropes, life jackets. We'll go there with ice screws. We'll measure the ice in several locations. We'll assess not just the thickness, but the quality of the ice. Whenever you cross a boundary, place another ice screw to make sure that you still have good thickness under you. Never become complacent. It's easy to assume that the ice is uniform across the surface of a lake, but because of currents, outflows, inflows, other reasons, you can go from very thick ice to very thin within a very short distance. So to not get complacent, and also just to have really good communication as well. Don't rely on others to figure out ice safety for you. I remember going out to Lake Louise one year when the ice was really phenomenal. It was just that beautiful early season ice. And I was totally guilty of getting lured by just the sight of 50 people out on the ice. And I kind of assumed that the thickness was really good because of that. And I can't recall the actual thickness, but what I recall is placing a screw and thinking, holy smokes, it's not nearly as thick as I thought. And I suspected that a lot of the people among those 50 people didn't place a screw either. So sometimes it just takes one or two people to go out there, and they may or may not have measured the thickness. So always best to make your own assessments and assess the risk yourself and get the proper gear. And and then just go out there with friends who know what they're doing, who have some level of training in water safety as well. But yeah, beautiful day at Spray Lakes. I was a little bit bummed out to lose the background, but then actually just kind of embrace the whiteout conditions and so try to turn it to our advantage in this image. And then a few years ago, this guy reached out to me. His name is Elaj Balde, and some of you might know him. He's a retired competitive figure skater. And he reached out on Instagram one year and he said, hey, my name is Elaj Balde, and I recently retired from competitive figure skating, and I've never experienced wild ice, amazingly. So it turns out a lot of those figure skaters, all they've ever known is manufactured ice because of the level that they skate at. It just blew me away that this guy had never been on lake ice before. And he reached out and he said, I'd be up for some photos if you want to get together, just give me a shout. And frankly, I never heard of the guy. And I looked him up on YouTube and I saw, some cool stuff that he could do. I saw Michael Jackson routine that he had going on. I thought was really cool. So I responded. I said, sure, when the ice is good, I'll let you know. And let's see what we can get. I'm kind of, I'm excited to just shoot something new in the realm of wild ice skating. I feel like I'm recycling the same ideas all the time. So I was thankful for that opportunity. And then one day I said, Minnewanka is in. Not a lot of it, but 1% of the lake is frozen. It's got amazing hoarfrost flowers on it. Just drive in from Calgary if you can. I think it's going to be really cool. And that was the beginning of an amazing collaboration. And I've spent a lot of time and with friends as well. We spent a lot of time with Elaj just trying to combine basically, his expertise and ours as photographers, and trying to both pitch in to create images that everybody likes, that both parties are happy with. And since then, Elaj has introduced me to a lot of other people within the figure skating community. I'm even starting to pick up on all the figure skating terms. So instead of telling them, can you do that thing where your arm does this and your feet do that, then I can actually use the proper term. And so it helps with efficiency out there, because that was a world that was totally foreign to me. And I've just learned so much about that discipline. And I'm just always in awe of those guys and girls, technical skills and the amount of precision that they're able to operate with. So I'll show you a couple more shots of Elaj. This is Elaj at Lake Louise last year. Pretty crazy. And the amount of precision, like I said, is unbelievable. I'll set up the composition and he will walk around. He'll skate around and say, okay, where is it that you need me upside down? And I'll say, that's exactly the spot. And I can tell you the number of times that we nailed it on the first one. He's just so precise. And because this is an image where he has to be in that exact spot, otherwise the image falls apart and it lacks intention. And he gave me exactly what I needed. So such a joy to work with people who are not just so talented and skilled, but also so passionate about what they do. And when you blend your passion as a photographer with their passion as a skater, a climber, or skier, you can create images that, for everyone will be quite memorable. I'll show you a couple more, two more skaters, Carlotta and Bryce, doing a lift. And again, that was something new that I'd never shot before. This was taken at Lake Minnewanka not too long ago. And just working with pairs opens up a whole bunch of other possibilities. And once in a while, though, when you're looking for good ice, you'll get skunked, right? Right now, we just got a big dump of snow in the mountains. And sometimes even when all the lakes are frozen, you'll get this big weather system move in that's going to shut down the wild ice season for quite some time, or at the very least until the next round of Chinooks blow through. And remember that happened to us a few years ago. But then we thought, hang on a sec, I know where there's good ice that still, because it's actually a covered ice ring. And so we were able to combine wild ice skating and ice caves. And that was the only place that offered really good ice, because of course there's a roof on top of it, and not any kind of roof, but this kind of vaulted, crazy featured turquoise ceiling that makes for incredible photos. And the quality of the ice, as you can tell, was just incredible. And to be able to introduce, like this is a lodge here, to be able to introduce figure skating friends to those kinds of environments was so rewarding, and we were able to get some pretty cool images, I think, out of it. So whenever hope is lost outside, sometimes the glaciers will just allow you to extend the wild ice season a little bit more. I'll show you a couple more shots. This is my friend Chris inside the Saskatchewan Glacier on this absolutely beautiful and pretty large ice rink that lasted for quite a few months a couple winters ago. And just being surrounded by that blue everywhere was just so special, and to be able to experience that with friends, just wild. And I'll show you a couple more. Again, Saskatchewan Glacier, which has been sort of a staple of one of our go-to locations for many years now. Just incredible. The chiseled features of those ceilings, and just the amount of detail that water has carved into those walls over the course of the summer is so cool. And here's another shot. This is my friend Lee on the same ice rink. We stuck it out until nighttime, and then we set up a few loom cubes to light it up from within, turned it into a bit of a psychedelic venue, and we passed the puck. We always make a point after we take the photos to just actually do the thing and have the experience, and just put the cameras aside and just turn into little kids for a bit and just play hockey or skate or whatever it is that we're there to shoot. And so I'll always remember that nighttime hockey session in the heart of the Saskatchewan, in the depths of the Saskatchewan Glacier that night. So special. And so if you haven't experienced that feeling of gliding effortlessly on pristine ice and past the wonderful scenery, or if you haven't seen fish under your feet, under your skates, or stars reflected all around you like you see in this shot. I remember just skating around I was on my own that night at Two Jack Lake, and I remember looking down, turning off my headlamp and seeing the stars reflected around my skates. I mean, it's just something that you never forget. If you've never experienced that, hopefully you'll get a chance. It's well worth considering for this season, and hopefully there's a lot of time left to this ice season ahead of us. So keep an eye on conditions. And of course, it's not just for skating, just for photography purposes. Even if you're not a skater, it gives you so much to work with. You can create some imagery that's very unique. All right, we're going to move on to methane bubbles. Such a trippy phenomenon that leaves nobody unmoved. Everybody without exception that I've shared this phenomenon with has just been overcome with emotion and excitement. It's pretty cool. So that's the next incredible phenomenon I want to discuss tonight. I remember the very first bubble shot that I ever saw from a guy named Darwin Wiggett, and I'm sure a lot of you know him. He was, he's a pioneer of photography in this area. He's just done so much to just celebrate the beauty of the Canadian Rockies and beyond, and he's inspired a lot of people to get out with a camera over the years. He's certainly inspired me. And I remember seeing his photos and just thinking about how what am I even looking at? I had trouble just processing what I was trying to process the image sort of in a 3D. You're looking at a 2D thing. Of course, you're trying to process it in 3D, trying to get a feel for it, a spatial feel for it. And it's nearly impossible until you've been there in person. And so I made a point the following winter, a couple winters later. It took me a little while, but eventually I made a point of just going to Abraham Lake in the winter. And I just intended to drop by. I remember I'd shot sunrise at Bow Lake. I'd gone down to the Pedo Lake shore after that to shoot some images there. And I thought I was going to drop by Abraham Lake to just take a look, because I feel embarrassed that I'm not really that familiar with Highway 11, with that section of the Canadian Rockies. So I'm going to go finally fill in the gap and just check it out. And I remember just intending to show up for like an hour and ending up on all fours for 6 hours, just completely engrossed in what was happening below me, and just being absolutely fascinated by the fact that every time I would just shuffle a little further, I would see an arrangement of features that was completely different from anything I'd seen before. And then I thought, holy smokes, that probably also changes every year. Every year it's a whole new tapestry to work with. And that got me super excited as a photographer. And nowadays, for good reason, people come by the thousands from all over the world to see this phenomenon for themselves. And when people think of methane bubbles, they immediately think Abraham Lake. I think for the vast majority of people, that's the location that they associate the bubbles with. But the bubbles can actually occur in almost any lake in the Canadian Rockies. And the way that they form, for those of you who are not familiar with them, is they form from organic matter resting on the bottom of the lake decaying. And when that organic matter decays, it basically releases methane that bubbles up to the surface. And when that first layer of ice forms in early winter, the bubbles are no longer able to reach the surface. And what happens is they'll just bounce on the ice, and they'll have nowhere to go. So they'll get trapped. And then as the lake freezes from top to bottom, and as subsequent layers of ice freeze, the bubbles will just get trapped, and they remain there potentially for months on end. And when they get trapped inside consecutive layers of ice, then you can get that really trippy, really cool 3D effect that you see here in this image. And this was taken at Spray Lakes. This is a self-portrait. And just like Abraham Lake, Spray Lakes is also a reservoir. And this is what the bubbles look like from underneath. This was shot with a very cold arm at Abraham Lake with the underwater housing, of course. But it's sort of it's really cool to see, and I think it helps understand the phenomenon a little bit to see what the bubbles look like from underneath. And if you picture this in video, the lowest bubble in the stack were still mobile. They were still sort of bouncing, sort of bobbing from left to right a little bit until they get encased in ice on their own. But it was pretty cool to see them from underneath, and they remind me of Mercury a little bit. Really cool features. And also, of course, the turquoise that is very prominent in the summer remains through the winter as well. And as you would expect, reservoirs where a lot of organic matter is present, where a lot of plant matter was quickly flooded almost overnight, well, those reservoirs tend to be a lot more conducive to the formation of those bubbles. So as you would expect, places like Abraham Lake, Spray Lakes, Barrier Lake, Lake Minnewanka, Kananaskis Lakes produce a lot of those methane bubbles because, all that plant material was basically and suddenly ended up at the bottom of water. And so this is Spray Lakes again, and really, really cool pattern. And again, those are all patterns that will never exist again. And so I think that's part of the excitement in shooting those methane bubbles, is knowing that you're shooting something that's very fleeting and that will never be sort of created by Mother Nature. One good tip is to get low and get close. I would say I go check out the bubbles on a lot of workshops, and one comment that comes up all the time on the ice is you're not low enough, you're not close enough. So use those wide angles to get to really exaggerate those features and just make them carry a lot of visual weight. So that would be one of my tips for shooting bubbles. And also be curious, move your feet. You won't go 5 meters without finding something new that you haven't seen before. So don't settle for the first sort of arrangement that you see, the first foreground you see. It really, really pays off to just cover some ground when you're shooting those types of features, of course. And the phenomenon of methane bubbles is perhaps even more surreal at night, I would argue. This is Lake Minnewanka, and a really nice arrangement of bubbles. And I brought them out using my iPhone. I try to separate them from the translucent ice around them using my iPhone. And I usually just place an iPhone or a Lume Cube behind me, pointing down. And that usually just gives me that sort of evenly lit bubbles, and usually it helps me avoid blown out areas. And like I said, it really separates them from the beautiful clear ice that they're stuck in, and really just helps me get that that depth in the image that I'm after. So a little bit of aurora activity on the horizon. Lake Minnewanka, as many of you know, has become the aurora capital of Alberta, or at least of the Rockies. And it's a wonderful place to take in a show. And in the winter, when you have those foregrounds to work with, it's pretty overwhelming as a photographer when you show up there and the aurora's going off in the background. I'll show you another shot that of the methane bubbles taken at night. This is a self-portrait taken at Vermilion Lakes, very, very early season. That was early. That was probably mid-October, first cold snap of the season. And I used the Lume Cube to light those up. The Lume Cube was actually overhead in this case, overhead with a green gel, in order to just try to get the lava lamp look to the bubbles and to bring them out of the surrounding blackness. And so I focus stacked this, got my bubble shots, and then I proceeded to enter the frame to kind of just balance out the composition a little bit, and left the headlamp on so I would be separated from the background. But yeah, just pretty incredible to be out there on ice, bubbles or not, just on ice under the stars. How could you not be excited about winter when that stuff's happening around you? And that's a good segue into my last topic for tonight, which happens to be my favorite genre of photography, and that is night photography. You know, when you take all those elements that we've discussed so far, all those phenomena, all those psychedelic things happening in the landscape, and you turn off the lights and you add the magic of stars or the Milky Way or the aurora, well, you can get, as you can imagine, some very, very cool, very unique imagery. The story behind this image is, I should say, those are only surface features. So before you get alarmed and think that my friend Chris is going to punch through the ice, know that the ice was thick enough to just drive on Lake Abraham. Not that we did, but you could have driven a truck on Lake Abraham, no problem. The ice was very, very thick. Those features were only surface features. And so cracks that happen in the top layer of ice. And interestingly, in the daytime, those features were pretty much invisible. And even at night, walking around, we could barely see them. It's only when we placed a light shining straight down towards the bottom of the lake that they emerged. And the three of us just went, whoa, that is so cool. And then, of course, the yard sale ensued, and the camera bags are all over the place, and the tripods. And we started to just create. And this image was just one light source, just one headlamp actually placed behind Chris to get rim light and to get him to show up as a silhouette, with a nice byproduct of revealing that arrangement of cracks around him and giving the image sort of a dreamy, a little bit of a threatening look. It does look like he's going to punch through. And yeah, Mount Michener in the background, Jupiter, just absolutely amazing night on Abraham Lake. And so, yeah, all those elements together for me just get me, that's definitely enough to just wake me up if I show up, you know, at 10 p.m. at Abraham Lake and I'm feeling a little sleepy. I quickly get very, very excited to get to work. Show you a couple more night shots that I like, that were fun to create. This is one from just an ongoing photo series that I have called Astro Climbing, and it just merges two of my passions in photography, which is climbing and nighttime photography. And it's a combination of it's a series that still gets me very, very excited to this day, because I feel like there is still so much I want to do. There's so many. The list of ideas only gets longer and longer. And this is the very cool place at Hafner Creek in Kootenay National Park this time, and it's a hoarfrost cave, a cave where that's high humidity that leads to the formation of really, 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 really unique features. Sometimes those pillars of ice are almost tall enough to just connect with the ceiling and will create like a giant prison. Some years it's a really cool place to explore, but in the daytime it's very, very cluttered. And in the background, you can see behind the belayer, the climber, you know, you have sun there in the background, and it's a mess back there, and it's hard to get an image that's to the point, that's clean. Hence why we wanted to return at night to have a little bit more control over where the light goes and where the attention of the viewer goes. And so we went there with super talented climber called Takeshi, and he hung in there for a long time, upside down, and I was able to get the image that I envisioned, that sort of has this sort of anti-gravity feel to it. Pretty cool place, especially at night. This shot is from something that I do annually, the annual nighttime ski mission to Moraine Lake. It's been many years that I'll just, typically on my own, I'll just ski up the Moraine Lake Road to just take in this place in just complete isolation. Of course, it lacks the famous turquoise color that draws a lot of people to Moraine Lake for good reason. But the trade-off is it's incredibly peaceful in the winter. It's very unlikely, especially at night, that you'll meet anybody else there. And it's become a bit of a tradition for me. I always bring the camera gear. And this is a self-portrait I took from the rock pile, about halfway up the rock pile. Very simple composition, just beautiful conditions with the moon rising over on my left and the fast-moving clouds. Just stunning. I want to show you a couple more cool findings that I made while wandering around in the depths of winter, in the winter darkness. This was a very welcome sight especially, sometimes you want to go, sometimes you go somewhere where you've shot so much, and this is not far from where I live. So I've shot Vermilion Lake so many times that I'm a little bit guilty now, I think, of relying on Mother Nature to give me something that I've never seen there in order to get an image that to me is exciting and fresh again. And I probably just should probably put more effort into meeting Mother Nature halfway. But that night I got an absolute gift from Mother Nature where we were actually there shooting ice for a long time, and we were shooting just skating shots. But then there was this skiff of snow that stuck around on one portion of the lake, and there was evidence of 3 ravens. It could be the same raven 3 times for all I know. I didn't actually see the animals, but those 3 sets of tracks heading directly towards Mount Rundle. And I just marked the spot and then returned when Orion was right above Rundle to try to get the sky to carry a bit more visual weight there. But yeah, just an amazing gift from Mother Nature. And but I think it's a good example of how it pays off to just really just be a detective when you just do photography and really move your feet a lot and let your curiosity take over and allow yourself to be a little kid again and go see what's around the corner. Here's another gift from Mother Nature, really peculiar block of ice resting on a wood, on a stump pedestal in the middle of Abraham Lake. And that was so weird. It was really a resting feature. And the story behind that day is that a few of us wanted to do the full skating traverse of Abraham Lake, which we would do from south to north because that's the way the wind blows. Good luck trying to do the opposite. It's a 36-kilometer traverse, so it's good exercise. So we start at Preacher Point, and we parked a car at the north end of the lake, and we skated the entire length of the lake, and it was amazing. But about 2 kilometers in, and that was early in the morning, we came across this feature. And I remember just spotting it from afar, thinking, what is that sticking out of the lake? Because it's right in the middle of the lake, too. It's not on the shore. And as we got closer, it just became more and more obvious what it was, although we couldn't really figure out how on earth that would form, because that was a large block of ice, large, heavy block of ice. And in a place like Abraham Lake that's very prone to high winds, it just seemed like a very unlikely feature. And it was resting on this piece of wood well above the surface of the lake. And we suspect that what happened is that the entire level of the ice was much higher, and then the hydro company just dropped the water levels and the whole ice went down, and this lone piece of ice just was kept up there because of the underlying stump. And I'm not sure how long it stuck around for, but it at least stuck around for long enough for us to return at night and try to work with it. So we were tired from the skating, of course, but the idea of just revisiting this location at night was exciting enough for us to return. And so we went back. We all worked that block of ice. I chose to just place a light behind it to separate it from the background, and then waited for Ryan to be placed over the mountain to just sort of get an image that was a little bit more balanced. But so cool what you find out there when you explore. Couple more shots before I wrap it up. This is called Interstellar. This was kind of a funny night. I shot this as a demo during one of my second to last nighttime photography workshop in Jasper. And we arrived at Talbot Lake one night, And that was the first night of the workshop. And as we drive from Jasper to Talbot Lake, the green is visible from the car to the naked eye. So the whole program goes out the window. We basically just chaos just ensues. Just get all the participants onto the lake. Our, the fellow leaders and I just shuffle our feet, try to get to everyone to get a good aurora shot in the bag. Of course, we haven't gone over anything at that point because it's night number 1, so it's a little bit chaotic. But I was able to just shoot this demo for the group later in the night, found this really cool crack on the lake, went and fetched a block of ice from another portion of the lake, and then lit Sam up from inside. And so we played around with that idea a little bit as a group as well. And it was the day of, I think, or the day before, because I'd worked with Sam at other locations. He's just this American photographer guy who has an astronaut suit, and he just travels all over the place to shoot his astronaut suit and does a lot of selfies. But he was kind enough to offer to be a model at the workshop that night. And I said, yeah, absolutely. Just come on up to Jasper. We'll put you up. We'll just introduce you to the group. And as you can imagine, the group was pretty thrilled to be able to work with him that night, with an aurora in the background as well. This is my last image for tonight. It's a recent one. It was shot a couple weeks ago on a stunning moonlit night at Pito Lake. I'm sure some of you recognize the lake. And I included it here just as a reminder that there's still time to get those images that show that really cool seasonal overlap. That usually that season where you have the open lakes with all the colors, yet you have the surrounding environment looking like midwinter. Usually that season that blends the two elements is pretty short. And it's coming to an end pretty quick. There's no question. All those lakes are about to freeze. So basically just, get out there while you can. Those are fun conditions to play with that kind of mess with your mind a little bit. Things that shouldn't necessarily maybe happen at the same time. So, beautiful moonlit night at Pito Lake just a couple weeks ago. I would now like to finish my little presentation tonight with a 4-minute slideshow that showcases some of my most memorable moments with the camera around the Canadian Rockies in the winter over the last 5 years or so. So we're going to play that 4-minute video, and then I'll be back on the other side with questions. I'm going to try to answer as many as I can. So stay tuned for questions. We're going to hop into one last video. Hope you enjoy.
All right, we are back. Thank you, Paul, for that amazing presentation. You're probably one of my most Canadian guests I've ever had on here. That subtle accent you have, your love of hockey, and I thought maybe you have maple syrup running through your veins, but after this presentation, I think it's antifreeze. Actually, I think you have going on there, because you certainly don't seem to get cold. I had the pleasure of hanging out with you at one of your more recent workshops. And we were out at Lake Vermilion there, just outside of Banff. Great night, super fun, but you were skating like crazy. So I think you might have missed your profession, actually. As good as you are as a photographer, I think you could have been a figure skater as well. So.
Well, it's good. Always good to have a plan B, I guess.
So some of the questions we're getting, one is, you have a very distinctive style, which I really like, and it's nice to see a photographer where you look at their work, and as you're scrubbing through Instagram or whatever, you're like, that's a Zizka shot, I can tell, because you generally put yourself in the frame or some form of a silhouette or something. It gives more perspective and a little different groove and a style to your photo, which I really appreciate. A lot of stuff you're shooting at night. How are you lighting the ice? I know a little bit because I was part of some of those, but how do you light, especially, are you bringing multiple light sources, multiple colors of light?
I like to give myself options for sure, because I find that it's so situation dependent. The main hurdle that I usually come across, and that's usually what comes up for people who I know when it's the first time shooting, lighting up ice, is it bounces back a lot of what you throw at it, and so it's really, really easy to blow it out. And so I find that it's nicer to have actually weak light sources than powerful ones for the most part. So I like to have just ways to dim down light sources, especially if you go out on a moonless night in really, really dark situations. It's nice to have a couple of gel options as well. But ultimately I find it's really something for me that even after playing around with that idea a lot, it's so much about experimenting. And now tonight you only see the final result. Of course, you don't see the 50 sort of shots that lead to the final one where a tiny little something is tweaked over and over again. It's hard to get it just right, but I think just the best thing to do is to just give yourself options. There's so many great options for lighting now. It's lightweight, it's fairly affordable. And so, just go out there and just keep that stuff in your bag all the time would be my recommendation.
That's very cool. And you mentioned the Blue Jean Glacier, the Blue Jean cave there. How easy is it to find these things? And you talked about safety certainly a little bit there. Is there certain ones that you recommend as sort of starter ones that are safer than others? I don't know if all of us have a 15-kilometer trek through the snowshoeing across a lake to find some of these. Are some of them easier to access, more accessible, and are they safer because they're a little more accessible?
I would say they're safer in terms of just the commute there, but the actual cave, I think you just have to go and assess it to find out. I wouldn't say there's glaciers that are safer, that tend to yield safer ice caves than others, but there's certainly glaciers that are a lot closer to the road. The Dome, the Stutfield, the Athabasca are much closer to the road than a lot of those other glaciers, so they tend to see a lot more visitors. And they tend to be pretty productive in terms of ice caves or other really cool ice features. They always offer tons to work with to photographers. So would encourage people to just get the necessary skills and gear, and then just go see what you can find, because every year, like I said, it's totally different. And I love making a point every year of going to the Dome Glacier, working my way from one end of the toe to the other, poking my head into everything that I see. I'm never disappointed. There's always something cool happening in those places.
Oh, super cool. And then as far as the skating on ice goes, when we went out in Lake Vermilion there, you went out and checked, said, oh, the ice is safe, it's good, but don't go over that section over there. Don't go too far over there, because it gets, it's kind of open over there. What is your kind of tolerance for ice when you go out there? Is it 3 inches thick, 6 inches thick?
I think I think it depends on consequence as well, right? Like Vermilion is knee deep in the winter, and so the worst that's going to happen is you're going to be uncomfortable driving home, and you're going to make a mess in the car. But it's pretty low consequence compared to a lot of other lakes. So I think that's part of the equation for me. In terms of thickness, I think most sources recommend 4+ for solo skating, 4 inches plus. And I think that's what Parks is on board with. But I think everybody assesses risk differently. The challenging thing is the best ice, the cleanest, most reflective ice is always early season ice, and so that means it's not going to be. If you wait for Red Cross standards, then that's it's a trade-off, I guess. But I think one thing you can do is there's a lot that you can do to mitigate the risk for sure. So I always do like throw rope, life jacket, the spikes that allow you to pull yourself back out, a way to communicate with the outside world should something go wrong, not skating alone, staying in sort of within range of where you can call out to each other if you fall in. Always measuring just ice screws, measuring the surface, staying away from outflows, inflows, and being aware that there's some weird undercurrents sometimes that will just really affect the thickness of the ice. So just because the last 10 kilometers were good to go doesn't mean the next kilometer will be reliable. So not getting complacent, and just ice screws are super fun to place anyway, so just place tons of them.
Now, have you had any close calls, or have you gone through the ice at all ever on an adventurous photo trip?
I've gone through the ice on Vermilion lots of times because I gamble a little bit. Just to get I'll get a bit greedy, wanting to get closer to a foreground, but just being fully aware that I might go through and I might just have a wet drive home. But of course, I wouldn't gamble nearly in the same way in a place where I can just be in over my head. So, and I've never had close calls on deep water.
Now, you seem to really love wide angles, and Canon was gracious to give you a 10-20 before anybody else did. How are you liking that extreme wide angle? Is that your sort of signature style?
I love it, frankly, because my workhorse lens is a lot of the shots you saw tonight were taken with a 15-35, typically more the 15 and the wide end. And since moving to mirrorless, one perspective I've been missing a little bit. I used to shoot a lot of fisheye as well. I love the wide, especially in tight spaces like ice skates, like we talked about tonight, or places that are just so grand and there's so much that you want to feature, like the Canadian Rockies with in-your-face skylines and rugged skylines. It's really nice to have that. I was really missing that range that's anything wider than 15. So yeah, I was pretty thrilled when it came out with the 10-20, and I went out there at night with it a few times, and once I got used to getting my feet out of the shot, I started to get some images that I really, really like. But it takes a while to get used to how wide that thing is, but you can fit in a lot in there. It's an amazing tool.
Now, you recently went to Churchill and were photographing polar bears, which is the complete opposite of a 10-20. I mean, if you're shooting polar bears with a 10-20 up close, something's not going on well there at all. So how was your experience shooting with, I think you had a 600mm lens for that trip?
Yeah, Canon Canada were kind enough to just send me a 600 f4 for that trip. And frankly, I think that was the tool for the job. I think I probably shot 85% of my images with it. Also had the 100-500, which I expected to use probably more. And I did shoot a few wide-angle shots of bears because they come mighty close to the little tundra buggies at times. But 80% of my shots, I think, with the 600 f4, it was really nice to just be able to get those intimate takes on the polar bears. And that f4 aperture is brilliant. And it's actually, for a 600 lens, frankly, after a whole day, I was feeling it a little bit after 6,000 shots a day, but it's actually pretty portable. So yeah, I found it pretty versatile lens to have.
Yeah, I
Loved
know
having it up there.
yeah, if you haven't shot long glass before, it's kind of crazy. But was it weird not to shoot 30-second exposures for once in your life?
It was weird. It was I didn't used to be much of a wildlife photographer, and I think part of it is I saw it as something that was just completely outside, that had zero overlap with landscape, when in reality there's a lot that can be transferable in so many ways, from composition to just to just just there's a lot of just creative there's a lot of your creative approach in landscape photography that you can just apply to wildlife photography as well. And so it's really grown on me. But yeah, it is kind of weird to just be shooting at the long end of the barrel for days on end. I did shoot some wide shots at night. I was fortunate to get the Aurora bear shot I was hoping to get as well. So the wide angle came in handy.
Now, you mentioned like we often are looking at social media for photos and we don't see it as much. I mean, you put out a ton of books. We have a bunch of them here in the store. I think you're the most popular author here. I mean, I know there's like 5 or 6 books here, and we can probably dig deeper and find even more. I don't know how many you've actually published so far, but some fantastic shots in here. How do you find printed material rather than projected material on your phone? And we have a question from Coral asking about, where do you recommend to get like a big metallic print done?
We get metallic prints we get out of Technicare in Edmonton. They're top notch to work with. We've really had a good relationship with them over the years. And metallic is super popular, especially for like those night shots, aurora shots, or eye-popping landscape shots from the Canadian Rockies. In terms of for me, I'm a huge fan of printing. I wish that was the end point of every single image that I shoot, because there's nothing quite like the feeling of just seeing an image in print, whether it's in a book or just holding a print in front of you. That's of course not possible, but I would highly recommend it. If you've been telling yourself you should, if people have been telling you to print your work for years, or you've been telling yourself you should do it and you haven't gotten to it, just do it. Or it's so easy to just make a book now, self-publish a book, to have a cohesive collection of your own work, your own vision, in paper format. It's priceless. You'll never go back. It'll be pretty addictive, and it's such a rewarding way to just see your efforts come to life. So highly recommend it. Even if you have a publisher, great, but even self-published, make a book.
Great. So you have a bunch more workshops coming up. What's next for you? What's happening?
I've got a couple of creative retreats that I'm super excited about next year. We've got Bow Lake Lodge all to ourselves at the end of May, and that's going to be a 4-day creative retreat.
Is that an open invite for hosts for YouTube channels?
Hey, why not? I'll see what I can do, Dave. But yeah, that retreat is called The Intangibles, and I'm super excited about it because although I love teaching settings and the math and all that stuff, that retreat is about what I truly feel makes for stronger photography, and the kind of concepts that are not as practical as just the math. Things like vision and intention and the ability to see. So that retreat is all about that. And then I have another retreat in Banff this time next year that I'm super excited about as well. That's called Genesis. And it's all about, we're going to do some printing, actually. We're just talking about printing. It's all about, the goal is to just conceptualize, execute, and print one image a day with a huge amount of intention. So we're aiming for like one image a day that just stands the test of time, that you're going to be proud of forever. And we do that 4 days in a row, and that's being held in Banff in November. So new events that I'm super excited about next year, among a bunch of others, but it's all on the website.
Well, that sounds fantastic. So speaking of that, if somebody wants to get a hold of you and somebody wants to get in touch with you, where can we find all information about Paul Zizka?
My website is constantly being updated, and it's zizka.ca. So just my last name, zizka.ca. Otherwise, we're very active on the social media networks. So Facebook, Paul Zizka Photography, elsewhere at Paul Zizka Photo. And yeah, it's always a pleasure to connect with fellow photographers on those online venues as well.
Awesome. So, well, I can't thank you enough for joining us. The presentation was amazing as usual. Your photos are fantastic and have that unique style, which I really like viewing and watching because it makes you want to go to the mountains more. It makes you want to get out there. I also want to thank Russell Brown for joining us, for Canon for answering some questions in the chat, and for Canon Canada for sponsoring tonight's event. But I really want to let you guys know it's Black Friday tomorrow, so as refreshed as I look now, tomorrow night at the same time, I'll certainly not look the same because it's going to be absolute chaos here, but good chaos. Canon has some amazing deals on that R5 with $800 off, plus $300, plus a battery, plus a card. Lots of stuff going on tomorrow. It's going to be fantastic. So, Paul, once again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We really enjoy your company, and I hope I can escort you on another seminar at some point and hang out with you in the cold, dark, wintry Canadian, trying to stay warm.
You're always welcome, Dave. Thanks so much for having me. That was great.
All right, guys. Take care. We'll talk to you guys soon.